Hello and welcome to an introduction to After Effects. We're going to take a brief look at After Effects and the main components of the software, and then in the next tutorial we'll actually get into working with keyframes. So first thing we need to do is open up After Effects. You may, if you don't have it in a dock down here, you can come up here to Spotlight and type in After Effects. And it should give you a list, and right there at the top, After Effects CC 2015 is what we want to open up. So go ahead and open that up, and once After Effects opens, it's going to come to a screen like this. This is the welcome screen. And in this, at the first, you may not have anything under Open Recent Items. We're not going to worry about that. But there's the ability to start a new composition, open an existing project. We'll probably look at those a little bit later. But for right now, let's just go ahead and close this out and get into After Effects. There's basically three areas that we're going to be looking at the most. Now, that's not all the areas that we're going to be working with, but these three areas make up the most where we're going to be working. The first is going to be the project panel right here. In the project panel is where we're going to import media, and you can right click in here and go to import, or we can go up to File, Import. You can see File there, or you can hit Command I on the Mac for that, Control I on the PC, and import, or you can just double click right here in a blank area of the project panel, and then it's going to open up this dialog box, and you'll be given a list of acceptable files that After Effects can import. The thing about After Effects is it is designed to bring in all types of media, whether it's video, graphics, pictures, audio, any number of types of media that we can work with in the composition. At this moment, we're not going to worry about importing anything, but this is the project panel, and you'll begin to see things evolve here. It's kind of like a bin if you're used to editing, a bin where you'll find all of your media there. Also, the compositions that we start will show up in here, and we'll look at compositions in just a minute, starting a composition. And the thing about After Effects, it is designed as a project. You start out as a project, and in that project you can have multiple compositions, so it would be like multiple timelines in an editor. So you can, if you're working on one project and it might have several pieces in it, say lower thirds, motion background, any number of types of motion media, you can design those all in one project, but they can be separate compositions. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But those compositions will also show up in the project panel. The next area, which is where we're going to be doing a lot of our work, is down here in the bottom. And this is going to be our timeline, and this will make more sense once we get a composition going. But this is where we will do a lot of our work. We will keyframe down here. We will look at the properties for each layer, and that's the way After Effects works, is it's based on layers, and we will begin to build layers in here, almost as if each piece of media will end up being its own layer. And we'll look at the basic properties that each layer has and expand from there. This area over here will represent time. It will start off at 0 and go to however long the composition is, and you can set up that composition. A lot of the compositions that we will work with will be 10 seconds long, 30 seconds long, maybe a minute and a half, just depending on the project and what we're trying to accomplish. But we can set that length here, and it'll show up again starting from 0 and then heading on up into whatever the time length is of the composition. And we can zoom in on this area and get down to the frame, down to the very frame of each second. And depending on what we set the project up for, project may be 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. Those will be the two that we will work with the most. But you can get down to the frame down here, and that's going to be important because After Effects works with keyframes, and we will set a keyframe on a frame in each second and work with it that way. So this area here will be our timeline, and our layers will show up over here. So this area here is the viewer, the composition viewer, and this is where we're going to see our work. This is going to be the visual feedback area. We can also work with the assets here, move them around, adjust them in this area. So we can do work in here also, but our keyframing is going to be done down here in the timeline. All right, let's look at over here. We have, this is going to be one important palette that we're going to need to look at. It's going to be our character palette. Here is where we're going to be able to work with text. Once we add some text into the composition, we'll see it here, and then also see it layer down here for text. When we add that in, we can adjust the text over here. The font that you might want to choose. Have a list of font that's on the system. So we can choose from the font, the style of the font, whether it's going to be bold, italic, any number of variations there, the size of the font. This palette here will help us work with that, the color. If we want to choose to add a stroke to it, we can do all of that from the character palette. Also, if we want to right align, center a line, or left align, we can do that down here, the text, and that can be helpful also. So just want to make mention of those two palettes being over here. There will be a number of other palettes that in time we will get to, effects and presets, and then also if we need to align. And there will be a number of others. This information palette here too can be helpful, giving us information and feedback as to what's going on in the composition. The last palette that we want to look at will be up here. This will be where our tools are, a number of tools that we will use. At first, we're not going to be using a lot of these, but we will. This is where our tools exist, and probably the one we're going to go back to a lot of times will be our selection tool. This tool helps us actually move the objects in the viewer. The hand and the zoom tool deal with the actual size of the viewer itself, where we're at 100% right here. With the zoom tool, we can zoom in, and this is basically like you would move closer to your canvas. It's not doing anything to the actual composition itself, it's just the viewer. And the hand also helps us move the viewer around as if you were picking up the canvas and moving the canvas. This has nothing to do with the actual assets or the media in the composition. We'll work with those a little bit more, and then there's your text tool if we need to add text, and these other shape tools, pen tool and the rectangle tool, do a couple of different things based on what you have selected in the timeline. So we will look at all of that as we get into After Effects, but this is the main work area. Our project panel, the timeline down here, the composition timeline, and then the viewer here. So we're going to be looking at those, working with those three areas.